Michael Mann is Distinguished Professor and Director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State University and also author of two books, including Dire Predictions, Understanding Climate Change, and The Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars. It's so great to have you on, and the book really presents in sort of ordinary, straightforward language the important findings of what is currently happening with the climate crisis on Earth. I would love to start at the broadest point possible with regard to what predictions we can make and predictions people may have heard about the future of the climate crisis. People sometimes hear, oh, the entire East Coast will be underwater, or all of the ice will be melted and the polar ice caps, etc. And sometimes it sounds a little bit hyperbolic. So let's break it down. What are the real concerns with regard to what we can predict will happen as a result of continued climate change?
Thanks. It's good to be on the show with you. So if we continue with business as usual, burning of fossil fuels, if we don't take precautionary actions to deal with our increased ongoing emissions of carbon into the atmosphere, we will likely see between 7 and 9 degrees Fahrenheit warming of the globe by the end of the century. Now, that won't, that doesn't mean that the entire U.S. will be submerged below the ocean. It means that there will likely be enough sea level rise to force us essentially to retreat from many of the major coastal cities of the U.S. and elsewhere around the world. It will mean that many of the problems we are already seeing, damaging impacts of climate change related increases in extreme weather, wildfires, droughts, flooding, all those things that we have seen already, worsened weather events because of the impact of climate change will get that much worse. If we, again, continue with business as usual burning of fossil fuels by the end of the century and we warm the planet by 7 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, arguably the rates of change that we will see in our climate will exceed our ability to adapt to those changes. On the
And
other
I'm
hand,
curious, Michael, as far as the temperature change, you talked about the sea level rise that we would see. What if our oceans were warmer also, would that not have a significant impact on ocean life and thus the entire animal ecosystem?
yeah, that's right. In fact, right now we have a major El Nino event going on, and it sort of gives us a glimpse of the future because during El Ninos, often sea surface temperatures around the world are much warmer than they would normally be. And with those large El Nino events, like the one we're seeing right now, we often see massive die-off of corals. We see an event called coral bleaching, where corals, they lose their color because the symbiotic organisms that give them that color literally flee. But the corals can't move. They're stuck. And if that goes on long enough, that kills off the corals. That is combined with the effects of ocean acidification. As we increase CO2 in the atmosphere, the oceans become more acidic. So all of these things are impacting ocean biota, coral reefs. This is part of the reason that climate change represents a major threat to ocean biodiversity, to fish populations, and our ability to continue to feed ourselves through fishing.
I would love to hear a little bit from you about how our audience can tackle when they are on the receiving end of what to me sounds like a tired old talking point from so-called climate skeptics or non-science believers, as I like to call them, that, hey, listen, humans on Earth, we only have observations about temperature from a very tiny slice of the history of our planet. And there's really no way at all to say that the changes in temperature we're seeing today are any more than just cyclical temperature changes. We've had ice ages, and it logically follows we also have warmer periods. We only have a little bit of data. That's a very common talking point we hear from climate skeptics. What can our audience have sort of in their arsenal to refute that?
Sure. So I will respond to that particular talking point, but it's often very useful to draw upon resources that exist out there. There is a site called skepticalscience.com, and if you go to that website, they have a list of the 100 or so leading climate change denier talking points
Hmm.
and the scientific responses to each of those talking points at the introductory, intermediate, and advanced level.
Fantastic.
And even better than that, you can download the whole thing onto your smartphone and have it at your fingertips. So, at that Thanksgiving dinner where that cantankerous uncle that you have who always
Right.
comes armed with, you've got that at your disposal and you can respond to him in real time. But with that particular talking point, it's actually combining a number of myths. First of all, it wouldn't even matter if the current warmth that we've seen, whether or not it's unprecedented, the reason for past periods of warmth is understood. The reason that the temperatures were so warm during the early Cretaceous period when dinosaurs roamed the planet, that was because of very high CO2 levels, a very high greenhouse effect. And that happened naturally over tens of millions of years due to natural variations in the concentrations of these greenhouse gases that have to do with things like plate tectonics. So those changes happen over a time scale of, it's 100 million years if you go back to the early Cretaceous period. What we are doing by burning fossil fuels is literally taking all the carbon that got buried in the ground after that period over 100 million years, and we're putting it back up into the atmosphere, but over a time scale of 100 years, a million times faster. So it's the rate at which we are modifying the atmosphere and warming the planet that is cause for concern, not whether or not there might have been past periods in the distant past that were as warm. One other thing, we do know that the recent warming spike is unprecedented, going back into the last ice age and probably back more than 100,000 years. There are various lines of paleoclimate evidence that we can use to piece together the puzzle of how the climate changed in the past. And those data tell us that the recent warming spike is likely unprecedented in tens of thousands of years, maybe more than 100,000 years. So it is unusual. And the CO2 concentrations that we've reached already are higher than they've been in millions of years. We know that as well.
And Michael, how drastic do human activities on Earth have to change to really make a dent in the impact that we're having? Sometimes I'll read about a new initiative. For example, we could move 30% of New York State's electricity consumption to renewable and green alternative energies on a per capita basis. And I'm thinking per capita, our population continues to increase. We're talking only about 30%. It seems like 10 years from now, any benefit that we get from doing that is already going to be undone by our population growth. Is my sort of pessimism or feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we have on our hands here justified, or can we really make a dent in this?
Yeah, I think it's a little overly pessimistic. Population in the U.S. isn't climbing. It's population in developing nations that continues to climb. But when demographers look at sort of the large-scale trends right now with global population, they estimate that we'll probably plateau by the middle of this century at about 9 billion people. So yes, there will be more people. Right now there are about 7 billion people, but that's not going to continue on an exponential trajectory like it has in the past. It appears to be plateauing out. Now, can we provide energy for those people without the continued burning of fossil fuels? That's the real challenge. And you mentioned the possibility of New York generating 30% of its electricity from renewables. Well, Germany's already doing it. Germany is doing that. If you look around the globe, if you tally the total global electricity use, we are now up to about 22% of our electricity generation globally coming from renewables. So there has been a dramatic turning of the corner just over the past few years in moving away from burning of fossil fuels, moving towards renewable energy to generate electricity. We've got a lot farther to go, but last year, for the first time ever, for the first time in many decades, we saw global economic growth without any growth in carbon emissions.
Right, and
Another
we
sign
reported
that
on
we are
that
turning the
extensively,
corner.
and that seems to be a
Yeah.
really important indicator of where things could go with the right decisions made, is it not?
Absolutely. It suggests that we're turning the corner. Now, we're not yet turning the corner fast enough to stabilize those greenhouse gas concentrations below dangerous levels. So it's going to take a lot more work, but there's reason for cautious optimism. We are already beginning to turn the corner.
Well, any conversation about climate change where my view is unnecessarily pessimistic for me is a win. You know, I mean, that's good news for sure. I'll remind our
Good to hear.
audience we've been speaking with Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State University. Check out his book, Dire Predictions, Understanding Climate Change. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you.